I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by John Templeton Foundation and Templeton Religion Trust. Hey everybody, welcome to Beauty at Work. We've just wrapped up season 3 of the podcast, which was on the theme of yearning. I hope you enjoyed the episodes. I now want to share with you a couple of bonus episodes which are related to our theme, and both of them are public panel discussions from the New York Encounter, an annual 3-day public cultural event held in the heart of New York City, offering opportunities for education, dialogue, and friendship. This first panel features a discussion between Harvard biologist Martin Nowak, Caltech biophysicist Rob Phillips, and is moderated by Rice University physicist Evelyn Tang. It is titled, All That Is Needed is Attention. Let's get started.
Good evening, everyone, and on the Encounter's behalf, welcome, both here at the Metropolitan Pavilion and those who are following us online. I am Evelyn Tang, Assistant Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Rice University, and I will moderate this event. Before starting, I would like to thank Spiritual Yearning in Science for sponsoring our conversation. Spiritual Yearning in Science is an initiative directed by Dr. Brandon Vaidyanathan at the Catholic University of America and funded by the John Templeton Foundation. And now I would like to briefly introduce our speakers. The full bios are on the Encounter website that you can read at leisure. But first of all, Martin Nowak is a professor of mathematics and biology at Harvard. He's a leading researcher in the fields of evolutionary biology and mathematical biology. Martin has established cooperation as the third fundamental principle of evolution besides mutation and selection. He has published more than 500 papers, many of them in top journals such as Nature and Science, and 6 books. Martin's most recent books, Beyond and Within, are poetic explorations of some of the deepest questions that arise at the interface of science, philosophy, and religion, and I think we're going to hear more about them tonight. Rob Phillips is a dear friend and grew up in California in a home filled with books, leading to a love affair with books and reading that continues to this day. He is the Fred and Nancy Morris Professor of Biophysics and Biology at Caltech. Prior to a great fun of life and science, Rob spent 7 years of travel, self-study, and working as an electrician. Although teaching is often viewed within research universities as a chore, Rob finds teaching to be central in learning about how the world works. He is currently engaged in several book projects, one of which with Anand Garcia provides a quantitative view of how genes are turned on and off. I would like to invite them to tell us a bit more about themselves. And so please go ahead. Rob, would you like to go ahead and view some slides?
Cool. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. It's such a huge privilege to be here. So, as Evelyn said, my name is Rob Phillips, and I'm a professor in biology and physics at the California Institute of Technology. And I have to say that that's been an amazing stroke of luck. I've spent the last 25 years there. And tonight, my hope for myself in this interesting conversation is to try and give you a little bit of a sense of the spirit that animates spending a life in science. And for me, it really begins very simply with the 2 words, I wonder. So let's just watch this together quietly. So what was my point here? In principle, that's a very mundane thing, looking at a sea lion swimming around in a school of fish. But for 2,000 years, people have been wondering about the starlings over Rome, just for example, how they fly in those weird murmurations. And curiosity really doesn't have to defend itself. It's a beautiful thing that we really still don't understand. So again, I'm excited for our conversation. I've had a great time listening to many of you already today and meeting you. And I wanted to comment not so much on the content of science, although I'd love to talk about that, but rather about the values. And some of you might have seen this book long ago. I remember it was on my parents' shelf. I looked at it. It didn't make a very big impression on me. But I do like this idea that maybe some of the most important things we know we learned when we were very young. And the reason I bring this up is that in physics, we have a monthly journal called Physics Today. And it has semi-technical journals that help all of us keep up with everything from the smallest to the very largest in the universe. But it also has these one-page opinion pieces. And I really like this one. You're not supposed to read what it says, so forget about that. But his title really is inspired by that book that I just showed you. And what he wanted to talk about is what are the values that one has to actually be a physicist, and I would say a scientist more generally. And so I thought I would just mention a few that mean a lot to me and that may come up in our conversation. And of course, if I run into you in the hallway, maybe it would be fun to chat about them. So for sure, curiosity. So yesterday I was at Rockefeller University with a friend of mine. He's not that I care about such things, but he's a Nobel Prize winner and a postdoc, but I'm serious about that. I don't care very much, and I don't think he does either. But he was telling me about his postdoc, and he said, this guy is so amazing because he's childlike in his curiosity. And both of us agreed that that sort of innocence, the childlike innocence, is something that actually is often lost. And in many ways, the most fun in science is not losing that. Openness. It's hard to learn things if you've already made up your mind. And so when we're looking at the natural world, for example, the sea lion, there's all sorts of possible explanations of things. And we don't know a priori what they are, which leads to I don't know. There's a sort of technical thing that we often use in science, which is called a null hypothesis. And for me, the most useful null hypothesis is I don't know. Love of the truth, wherever it may lead. Gratitude. You don't know other people's narratives. Not being opinionful. This one's very important to me. I learned it from Robert Nozick in his book, The Examined Life. I don't have to have an opinion about everything. And it's liberating, I would say. And that's helpful in science. The mystery of the world, that's already present in a simple, mundane thing like a sea lion swimming in a school of fish. Amazement that the human mind has achieved what it has in terms of uncovering a little bit of the mystery of the world around us in a way that, in general, we agree on implicitly, if not explicitly. And for me, also respect for the achievements of the past. You know, one of the things that came up and is shown in that video that I very much appreciate, I'm very dedicated to celebrating Archimedes. I know that Martin's going to talk about mathematics as well. He and I share this great love of the tradition of mathematics. I'll come to that in a moment. Not taking things for granted. Knowledge is hard. Be careful. Improving upon silence is hard. And instead of, here's what I know, instead saying, here's the way I'm thinking about it. So in my teaching, one of the things that's been my greatest privileges is trying to take students out into the world. I have a huge responsibility when I meet 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds at Caltech. And so I've led on the order of 20 field trips to the Galapagos, to Indonesia, to New Zealand. And often we spend 20 to 40 minutes a day in silence, every one of us with one of these little green notebooks, which is waterproof. And we basically either draw the rocks or draw the animals or write questions that start with the words, I wonder. So this one may be perhaps weird for this audience, but most of the way we've been communicating with each other today has been with words. And that's cool. But I just wanted to put a plug in for the idea that maybe it's interesting to communicate about the world using mathematics and numbers. And it's really actually very powerful. And also, I know Martin will mention this, or I think he will, it's also, in a certain sense, very spiritual, at least for me. My final thought is just to say that in Paris at the ESPCI, which is a scientific institution where Pierre and Marie Curie worked and where they discovered radium, if you look on this wall, you'll see this line from Miguel de Unamuno. I don't remember how to pronounce his name. It says, to question and doubt. It says, true science teaches above all to doubt. So for me, that's really the essence of things. So that's all I got. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Was it too long?
You were too short.
Okay.
It's a great honor and joy for me to be here. I have been at the New York Encounter once before, and it's great to be back. So here we are. All that is needed is attention. That's the topic of our little conversation here. And I was very, very moved by the video that is on the homepage of the New York Encounter 2025. And so I also use it in my talk several times. All that is needed is attention. So we are living in the following world where many people think that science is a distraction from spirituality. Science is almost something that is at odds with believing in God. And I want to change this. I want to change this in the opposite view, because I think if we pay attention to what science really says, it leads us to God. And that's the message of my talk. Science leads us to God. So when we pay attention, we have to ask, like a child, Rob mentioned the childlike approach, like a child, what are the most important things that actually science puts as landmarks out there? What are the three things that really happened? And the one thing is the origin of the universe. The second thing is the origin of life. And the third thing is the origin of language, of human language. And what do these events give us? The universe gives us physics. This is really the beginning of a physics that is unfolding. Stars are being produced, they make chemical elements. So that gives us physics and chemistry. The origin of life gives us biology. What does language give us? The first thing that language gives us is prayer. Because as soon as humans had language, they were spiritual beings. The findings in the Shuvi cave and in other places are expressions of a kind of spirituality. So I would argue, as soon as you have language, you talk about spirituality, about God. As soon as you have language, you discover the world of ideas. And here I mean Platonic ideas, forms. You have poetry, you have philosophy. You have the discovery of mathematics. You have the discovery of science, of technology, engineering, and medicine. All that matters very, very deeply to us is a derivative of language. And why is language as big as the origin of life itself? Because it gives rise to a new way of evolution. Because we have evolution no longer in the genetic realm, we have it also in the cognitive linguistic realm. This is the time scale, if we want to add a few more other events. So when did it happen? Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. Sun, Earth, Moon, 4.6 billion years ago. Physicists always know things very, very well. And my critics criticize me for worshipping physics, but I ask, what is there not to worship? And in biology, things are sort of more complicated. So origin of life, we are maybe on Earth, we don't really know. But what we all agree is that bacteria and archaea were there 3.5 billion years ago, the higher cells with organelles 1.8 billion years ago. And all the while, until 600 million years ago, if you come to Earth, you see no sign of life without a microscope. So this was all microscopic life. Things that you see with a free eye comes into existence 600 million years ago. This is the complex multicellularity. And then the last big thing, what is the most interesting thing that happened in the last 600 million years? That is the arrival of human language, because it gives rise to a new way of evolution. So the forces of physics, we can conclude, and evolution, leads to living beings that raise their voices in praise of God, that discover underlying unchanging truth. And here I'm stating a fact. This is a scientific fact. Physics and evolution have led to people who recognize spirituality. What is it that evolves? Ernst Mayr, a Harvard biologist, pointed this out, that loosely speaking, we talk about evolution of genes and so, but what really evolves is the population. So the carrier of the evolutionary process is the population. The two classical ingredients of evolution recognized by Darwin, even though not properly understood, is mutation and selection. So Darwinian evolution is based on mutation and selection. Selection means that different types grow at different rates. And to this, my work over the last 20 years and the work of many others has really added cooperation as a fundamental additional principle of evolution. And cooperation means that individuals work together so well that they form a higher level of organization. Cooperation, in my mind, is the master architect of the evolutionary process. Whenever something amazing happens in evolution, like the origin of life itself, or the first cells, or human language, cooperation needs to be involved. Cooperation is that which leads to human language. So I call it the master architect of the evolutionary process. Cooperation means helping others. And here we have three examples of what helping others means. The one is 3 billion years old. This is cyanobacteria. And every so often, a cell dies in order to feed the others with nitrogen. So this is the ultimate sacrifice. The cell dies, such others can live. Social insects, Ed Wilson was mentioned this afternoon. These individuals don't reproduce. They help another individual to reproduce 125 million years ago. This is Vincent van Gogh's painting of the Good Samaritan, and we all know what that is. That is cooperation among humans. One nice element of this analysis is that winning strategies of cooperation are generous, hopeful, and forgiving. This is based on a game theoretic analysis of how to win. Those strategies that succeed, they know how to be generous, they know how to be hopeful, and they know how to forgive. So therefore, evolution is not only competition, it's also cooperation. It was cooperation from the beginning. The great discoveries of evolution are impossible without cooperation. And finally, cooperation is a preparation for altruism, for agape, and for love. This is why it is okay now to talk of humans, or to ask of humans to actually like each other. Because without cooperation, we would have been the products of just some fight out there. Nevertheless, we are now at this stage where the survival of intelligent life on Earth is actually in a critical situation, in my opinion. So for the survival of the human species, we need more than what we have now. We need global cooperation, and we need cooperation with future generations. And right now, we are actually doing exactly the opposite. We don't cooperate on a global scale, and we don't cooperate in order to leave a better world to the next generation. What we need is a science of love. And science of love is actually a term that is coined by one of my favorite saints, and you will encounter her at the very end. We need a science of love, a pandemic of goodness, and a return to God. We need attention in order to solve this problem of global cooperation. And here begins a new life with this attention. So if science makes you aware of that which matters, the encounter with a great love gives us a glimpse of a mysterious presence, the ultimate beauty and love, whom we have always expected but never met. And this kind of encounter led me to write these books. For many years, I wanted to write books that bring together science and religion, science and God, but I didn't really find the voice. And then suddenly the voice that was in me was the idea that I let a female divine presence talk about it while I'm only listening. So the encounter with a great love has the power to transform the world. And this first book, Beyond, is really a meditation on God and love. It's a dialogue between a male Faustian voice and a mysterious female presence, an unnamed Beatrice that was actually written by one of the people who commented on the book, who becomes his guide to leave the cave of shadows. What Beyond wants to say is that beyond this world of change is an unchanging reality. And this unchanging reality is, for example, represented in mathematics or in truth, but also in love and in God. In order to see this, all that is needed is attention. Just in the last few days, I published another book, and this is called Within. And here the idea is really that God is waiting for us within as our teacher, as the love of our life, as a lover and beloved. And if you have this view, then you realize from every pair of eyes that is looking at you, it is God that is looking at you. And you also realize that the purpose of human life is to find God by love. And this book is completely inspired and devoted by one of the greatest saints that lived in the last 500 years. And this is her. And one of my favorite quotes of her is, "In the heart of the church, my mother, I will be love. And thus I will be all things as my desire finds its direction." Thank you very much.
Wonderful. I think we're very curious about how your own personal journey and experiences have shaped, all of these beautiful fruits that you've been telling us about. So we're curious about how your scientific questions and ideas arise. And in particular, why do you believe that mathematics and harmonious principles govern nature? So Rob, you spoke about science and this quest, this constant doubting, this constant search for truth. This is an exhausting quest. Why did you devote your life to it? Or Martin, that you believe that mathematics, cooperation governs nature. These seem like audacious claims and audacious quests, given how messy nature is. Why are we looking for these principles and these ideas?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll take a crack at both of those. So as far as how, I think there's no one answer, obviously, and everybody's different. But in my case, I would say there's maybe 4 different kinds of things. So one is amazement. So I want all of you to imagine the following crazy experiment. I have my arms out. You cut off this arm grows shorter. This arm starts to grow. When they're the same length, they grow back out. So that sounds crazy, but that's exactly what you will observe in a microscopic organism with a microscope called Chlamydomonas. And, that's enough. It's so interesting and so unusual that that's enough to say, is that worth spending 5 years of a graduate student's life on? Dissatisfaction, that's another example. No, but seriously, it's a huge responsibility. When a 20-year-old comes to you and says, I want to do a PhD, you're asking them to spend 5 or 6 years of their life working on something. So I feel like you have to take that seriously. And I'm telling you, I think that fascinating question is worth it. I would say dissatisfaction, the fact that there are things we should understand that we don't. So that's a big one for me. And then where questions come from is learning and teaching. I think that's, there's no distinction between teaching and research for me. Just a quick note before Martin goes on the subject of the audacious notion of principles. I think evidence forces it on us. Caltech sent out an email a few years ago saying, show up at the athletic field at such and such time because there's going to be a transit of Venus. There were 10 telescopes set up, and we went over there as a family, and sure enough, Venus appeared, it crossed the sun, and it left. An eclipse is, it's not controversial. It's evidence of these audacious principles, I guess is what I would say, because the mathematics works.
Yes, so it's interesting to note that both Plato and Aristotle held mathematical knowledge in high regard. They held mathematical knowledge higher than things that you know based on experiences. But they did not know something that is very important. They did not realize that mathematics was the language of nature ultimately, because at this time this was not established. So it was kind of an additional trick that was used by somebody to do certain things, but it was not realized as the language of physics and definitely not as biology. It was actually Johannes Kepler who was the first person to believe in a physical interpretation, a physical reality of a mathematical calculation. And I would also say Galilei. And so therefore physics developed very strongly with this connection with mathematics, but biology didn't have this. So at that time, it was understood the heavens were perfect and the heavens could be described mathematically, the planets. But the Earth was so messy that mathematics doesn't work here and is not sort of needed. Much later came this idea that biology is also subject to mathematical analysis. And this is what has fascinated me throughout my life, the mathematics of biology. And I would argue we have reached a stage now where in biology, we know things if we know them mathematically. We understand evolutionary aspects if we can understand them mathematically.
Well, I think we would all agree, given that we are trying to use mathematics, the three of us, to study biology.
Okay, everyone, that's a good place to stop the first half of this episode. Join us next week for the second half of the conversation, where we continue the dialogue between Evelyn, Rob, and Martin on wonder and attention in science.